But first, between now and November, you're going to hear a lot of scaremongering about global warming. I mean, you just take today. The Sydney Morning Herald running the most hysterical scare. Climate change spurs threat of war, mass migration in region. And there's going to be a lot more of that kind of rubbish right up to November, because that is when the United Nations will hold its latest big global warming meeting, this time in Glasgow. And the media is going to go nuts before then, trying to beat up the scare so that hopefully you'll then finally say, yes, something must be done in Glasgow to save the planet from this apocalypse. Give us net zero emissions, please, Mr. Prime Minister, whatever the cost. Just save us. Now, this Sydney Morning Herald is so shameless that it last week even interviewed Tim Flannery, the climate alarmist who was made Chief Climate Commissioner by the Gillard Labor government, even though he's actually an expert in mammals, not climate. Now, I say the Sydney Morning Herald was shameless because no one I know has been so wrong so often about the climate than Tim Flannery. And still the Herald and the ABC trot him out as an expert. Anyway, this time, Flannery had an anecdote for the Herald about the Murdoch media, of which Sky News is part, about him bravely bailing up, allegedly, I take everything he says with a grain of salt, bailing up James Murdoch, Rupert Murdoch's youngest son, and complaining, what you've done, Flannery means what Murdoch outlets have done, is destroyed people's faith in science. And it will take many decades to undo that damage. I've got to say, I could not believe the cheek of Tim Flannery in saying that, or of the Herald in reporting it. Because no one I can think of has done more to destroy people's faith in global warming, religion, science, than Tim Flannery himself. It is Flannery who again and again has beat up exactly the kind of scares you're reading now and will read right up to this Glasgow summit about the end of the world, about doom and disaster and whatever. And again, Tim Flannery's been proven wrong. I mean, take his most famous stud prediction from 14 years ago.
Even the rain that falls isn't actually going to fill our dams and our river system.
Totally, laughably false. Sydney dam levels today, 95%. Melbourne's dam levels, they haven't been higher for 24 years, despite a growing population. So many other Flannery predictions turned out to be duds as well. So many of his predictions of global warming disasters also went bust. And I tell you what, that sure destroyed my trust in what Flannery keeps passing off as the science. Probably destroyed your trust too. I mean, remember Tim Flannery claiming 2 decades ago that Perth will die because of global warming, that there was a fair chance Perth will be the 21st century's first ghost metropolis. And Perth wouldn't be alone. He said in 2005, he told the Sydney Morning Herald, which keeps swallowing his nonsense, he told the Herald he was personally more worried about Sydney because Sydney only had 2 years' water supply left, and if computer models were right, then drought conditions would become permanent. Well, it turns out, of course, that the computer models were wrong again. In fact, they've consistently predicted more warming than we've seen and predicted disasters that never happened. For instance, Flannery also used to say we'd get more cyclones. Well, we haven't. He used to say that the Arctic could melt away by 2009. It didn't. He used to say the Pacific Islands like Tuvalu, they'd drown. In fact, Tuvalu has grown in size, as did 43% of Pacific Atoll Islands. 43%, just 14% shrank according to Auckland University research. Yet no matter how often Flannery has been wrong, the media still promotes him as a guru. They still protect him because to them global warming is not about truth. It's a religion. and you must be scared into being good. Now, let me just mention one final example. 2 years ago, Tim Flannery made another false claim. He said that global hunger had increased for the past 3 years because of extreme weather events. Well, in fact, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization shows world harvests of cereal crops like wheat and rice just keep setting new records. Global warming apparently is brilliant for growing more stuff, for feeding people. But how often have you been told, oh, but the computer models, they prove that global warming is going to cause terrible droughts and world hunger and all sorts of things like that? Well, in fact, 19 years ago, the ABC's Fran Kelly, she was pushing some dodgy report along those lines, claiming that by 2025, just a couple of years from now, water scarcity is going to cause massive agricultural losses. Then 13 years ago, the Sydney Morning Herald, them again, was reporting that the drought back then may never break. Farmers had to face up to what it called a permanent drought. And even this year, we're still reading from academics that climate change means Australia might have to abandon much of its farming. You see, that's the problem when you keep relying on climate models that don't work and when you don't actually simply stick your neck out the door and check what's happening. Because there is no permanent drought. Farmers are not walking en masse off the land. In fact, the opposite. Our Australian Bureau of Agricultural and Resource Economics and Sciences has just reported that our farmers are on track to break the record for growing crops and raising animals. $7 billion of produce. That's more food, more wealth. And if that is global warming, it's actually good for us. But between now and November, you watch, between now and the Glasgow summit, you're going to hear the opposite. It's a disaster. It's a catastrophe. Just listen to people like Tim Flannery. But how often do they have to be wrong before you ask yourself whether maybe what most of the media is telling you about global warming might not actually be true?